Hello, our dear viewers. Welcome to yet another episode of Decent Conversations, where we are all about having lives that work. And I'm your girl, Tabitha Mwai. Today, our topic of conversation is on comprehensive sexual education, also commonly referred to as human sexuality education. And with me is a panel that is well conversant with this topic, expert in this field, and I would wish for them to introduce themselves, starting from my farthest left.
Hi guys, my name is Arnold Gekonge and I'm a youth advocate for adolescent and youth sexual reproductive health. I'm also the team lead for a youth-led initiative called Champions for SDGs.
Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Mary-Liz Biugwa, a human rights defender and a black queer intersectional feminist, working on issues to do with women, children, girls, and people and LGBTQ persons, and I'm happy to be here today.
Thank you, and we have our sign language interpreter, who is Salome Jerry. Let's go into the conversation on comprehensive sexual education. We've had people supporting it, others are opposing it, and there's so much debate about comprehensive sexual education. There's a debate around whether we need it in the new curriculum, whether it's right content for children in school. Probably you can shed more light. What exactly does it mean? What does it entail, and why do we need it?
Comprehensive sexuality education is basically, it's founded under the United Nations guidelines on how to empower young people in terms of accessing sexual and reproductive health and rights, in terms of just understanding themselves and how they can know better how to maneuver around the world of seeking health services when it comes to their health and how they grow into understanding their bodies and their sexuality. And the main 5 things that they're looking into is early child marriages, which is very fundamental because then when you're looking at young people begin from when you get to the age where you're going to school and everything, and you're exposed to all these things, and then now you begin to become a target audience where you are supposed to be made aware of these things. Another thing that they address is early pregnancies and mental health issues. And it's only in Kenya that currently we are only beginning to vehemently speak about mental health issues. But for a period of time, it has been an issue that affects especially young mothers, because then when you fall pregnant while you're still in school or you're still under the education age bracket, then it becomes really hard for you to maneuver, and that can easily culminate to mental health issues. And when that happens, then the United Nations saw it fit that they can be able to come up with a way in which, how does that affect your sexuality as an individual? How do you then come up with solutions in terms of addressing that? The third thing that it addresses is access to sexual and reproductive health and rights, which is a very important and fundamental thing when it comes to young people, and it feeds highly into the first 2, where early child marriages, they address things like FGM and the likes, and then when it comes to early pregnancies, it's how basically it affects girls and women in the society, and now how access of sexual and reproductive health and rights, including access to contraceptives, understanding your body, and just making those sober decisions on family planning, and how we can be able to better those when it comes to children growing in the society. Another thing they address is HIV and STIs vulnerability. In a society where young people are becoming more aware of their bodies very early, it means the percentage in which young people are having sex is really high, and that means they're hugely exposed to STIs and HIV infections. That said, it was fit to come up with a comprehensive sexuality comprehensive sexuality education platform where young people can be able to understand what are the safer ways of making sure you're having safe sex, and ensuring even if you are trying to have safe sex but things go wrong, how can you be able to counter that by looking into ways of maybe accessing things like PrEP, accessing things like what do we call them, ARVs and all that kind of stuff. And then the last one that it addresses is violence, and on this there was a research that was done in 21 countries across the world, and the research that came out was that we have between 6 and 39% of girls being victims of violence. It could be any kind of violence, abuse, rape, defilement, and all that kind of stuff. And then we had 3 to 29% of boys also being victims of violence, and that culminated to things like pedophilia, sodomy, and all that kind of stuff. And then now looking at those statistics from 21 countries, when you replicate it into all the countries across the world, then how does that look like? And then how then does it create an importance for comprehensive sexuality education in schools to be able to ensure that these young people who have clearly indicated to be the vulnerable group and target group can remain safe regardless of the changing trends in which people socialize and exist?
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Like you've really expounded on the basics of the subject of sexuality education, because I think there's a lot of misconception. We don't know what it really entails. We just hear CSC, CSC, we're seeing campaigns online, but getting to the fundamentals of what it all entails, it really sounds like something that we need. But I will ask, why now? Before I get to Arnold, I want you to tell us why now? Why the new, like the new move and wave of need to have CSE?
What we cannot afford to be is be on the wrong side of history. And things have been happening the way they've been happening for a long period of time. Now, why now is the answer, is because why not now? Because then if we wait until tomorrow, or we wait until 50 years from now, or we wait until 100 years from now, already things are looking terrible currently when it comes to the target audience of this comprehensive sexuality education. In fact, if you ask me, we've taken too long to get here. And now that we are here, why waste any other second when we could use this moment to come up with proper, because then the biggest struggle that I've seen is how then do you take all of it and adapt it into our education system and everything. The idea is not to take all of it. While this was done from an international perspective where they looked at different countries and the issues that they face, we need to acknowledge that majorly all the issues that were addressed there, we faced them. So then how can we merge? How can we be able to borrow hugely on what they said, but also be able to custom make this comprehensive sexuality education a thing that is beneficial for our young people? Because then what I see mostly is complaints laid on young people. Why did you get pregnant so early? How did you get HIV at a very young age? Why are you complaining of mental health issues? Nobody is saying if you have mental health issues, here is the solution. And so the comprehensive sexuality education is now an important thing, because now it is coming up with possible solutions for the issues that young people are facing. Yeah.
Thank you for elaborating on that. The other challenge that I'm seeing in this conversation is we are, I will say, Kenya, the better part of Kenya is quite conservative. Growing up, topics around sexuality, around sex, around basically the human anatomy were subjects left to school, where you will only cover it during the reproductive sessions in class. And so, given that background, there's little, adjusting to the fact that we need to have these conversations early, and at what time we need to have them is becoming a challenge. And we've seen so many people oppose the idea of integrating the human sexuality education into our curriculum. So what I would want Arnold to comment on is then how can we put the balance when we merge it with our cultures and our customs and our beliefs, based on Kenya, on the Kenyan setting, so that we have it in our system, whether it's in school, in churches, wherever. How can we bring it?
Thank you so much. So let me contextualize this conversation. And we have the Sustainable Development Goals, which were adopted by the United Nations in 2015 and which feed into the Agenda 2030. Under Sustainable Development Goal 3, we have subsection 3.7, which talks about access to reproductive health information and services for young people. In our Kenyan context, we have particular policies and legal frameworks which feed into ensuring that adolescents and young people also have access to information and services regarding reproductive health. For example, it is the Constitution of Kenya 2010 under the Bill of Rights. It gives all citizens access to information, including age-appropriate comprehensive reproductive health education. Also, we have the Adolescent Sexual Reproductive Health Policy of 2015 by the Ministry of Health. It also gives guidelines on how adolescents between ages 10 to 19 can access information and services in health facilities regarding their reproductive health. We also have the National Guidelines for Provision of Youth-Friendly Services, which also provide guidelines on how adolescents and also young people can access that particular information and services. So we can't run away from the fact that we live in a very cultural and a society that is so inclined to culture and religion. And I think that religious leaders and parents, teachers, young people ourselves, we ought to play our role, because there's something all of us can do regarding ensuring that adolescents and young people have access to information so that they can make healthy choices. The last Kenya National Demographic Health Survey indicated that the sexual debut is at age 15. So that means young people are beginning to have sexual activities at a very early age. That also feeds into the rate of teenage pregnancies that we have nationally now, at 1 girl in 5 who has already delivered their first child or is pregnant with their first child before they get to 19 years old. So it is important that all of us hold the conversations. It could be at home. Our parents, we could speak to our children, open up and get to know what issues are they facing regarding their relationships, regarding their lives in general. And also in school, teachers will be able to come in handy, especially for those young people who stay in boarding schools. The people whom they have contact to most are the teachers. And when they have the capacity to teach them on how to behave responsibly as young adults, it would be a good place to begin.
So probably my concern is, now how do we break that ice? Because right now the angle that we are taking is to introduce it through the schools. That is an easy entry in my opinion. But we want these conversations to be taken even at home. We want the conversations to be taken even in churches. We want the conversations to be taken in mosques, anywhere that the young people are gathering. So how do we break the ice in the sense that these conversations can be taken to all these social spaces? And this, as you're saying, there are policies. We have very good policies in our country. The policies and even the law that supports age-appropriate content and access to services on sexual reproductive health. So, but you see, the policies are there. But when you go to these facilities, we are not having these conversations. Young people are not accessing these services. So my question is really, how do we break that ice so that we can start the conversation? Because we don't have to wait, as Mary-Liz has mentioned. How do we break the ice, especially in our community settings, in our social spaces?
So let me just respond to that by saying that everybody should play their role. That is how we are going to begin facing this particular issue. Because if we leave it to schools alone, it might not be appropriate for students and pupils to access information and also be very aware. So when we have parents who open up and speak to their children, and children who are also free with their parents to speak up and face them and speak about the issues that they're facing, it could reduce even the cases of mental health that we are having.
Okay, I don't know if Liz, you have something to add on that.
Yeah, for me, and I know it's very cliche to hide around civic education, but I feel like all of us have a responsibility in terms of learning, not only the young people, because of course the young people are affected, so it's not a responsibility, it's mandatory that they're able to learn. But the kind of learning that we need to do is customize the kind of learning where, when it comes to hospitals, give them knowledge that is important when it comes to how to address issues like when a young person who has just had unprotected sex and is in fear that they could be infected with an STI or HIV, how does a nurse treat that case? Because then there's a lot of stigmatization when it comes to even youth wanting to go to these health facilities to get these services. They're stigmatized. They're told, you're very young, why are you having sex? The real issue there is not why the person is having sex. They've already had sex. Address the issue as it is by making these medical professionals be able to have first-hand information on how to address these things. Things like confidentiality, things like, you know, I know statistics are very important and they're released there, but statistics do not pinpoint anyone. But there's a tendency that when a young person goes, a young person is targeted in terms of now every other clinician is talking about this person because they came and said A, B, C, D. So people are no longer feeling safe when it comes to accessing these services from that perspective. When it comes to at home, parents, you know, and people in the society generally, we have a lot of stigma that goes around young people and sex, because for a long period of time, it has been a taboo to speak about sex and sexuality issues. So now, part of the civic education should be normalizing conversation about sex, because whether we like it or not, sex is being had. And sex is coming with consequences, where young girls are becoming pregnant, where young boys and girls are being victims of abuse, where both young girls and boys are becoming even more scared to speak about the experiences they're having sexually, because sometimes it's not because they're doing it voluntarily. Sometimes it's abuse, but they do not, there has never been a comfortable platform that has been provided for them to talk. So then one of the most important thing is normalizing conversation in the society, so that the next person I see that is an adult, that is someone I feel like I can talk to, the first thing I'm not scared about is that, what if I tell them and they judge me? But I'd be thinking, I tell them because I know from them I'll get a solution. And then when it comes to institutions, of course, there has to be a perspective of refresher courses, a perspective of when we are starting a new curriculum, all the same, there has to be a way of integrating teachers into that curriculum. Because unlike many professions, being a teacher is a profession that there's a stalemate that is experienced over a period of time, because you're doing the same thing over and over and over again. So then a refresher would mean going through a process where all teachers, it's mandatory for them to take, and they're made to understand about the comprehensive sexuality education and how they can be able to utilize that information to ensure that they're giving information to the correct information to the right person. Because then in a school setting, like a primary school for instance, we have kids all the way from 6 years old in class 1 to 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years old. How then are you able, because it's only through doing a refresher and learning this information and mastering it firsthand, the way you've mastered part of your job, that you'll be able to know if an 8-year-old comes. Because like I always say, a body of a child begins to develop sexually at the age of 8. If a child comes at the age of 8 with a sexual issue, like an 8-year-old who has started seeing their menstrual period, how then are you able to take the information in the comprehensive sexuality education and tailor-make it to suit this child and address the issues that they have at that point, without negating the issue that they're facing, and putting in mind that as it grows, as they grow up, then there's access to this information at a level that they've gotten. Yeah.
I like the issues that you're raising, and then that something that is coming to mind is that with this education, we also need to look at youth-friendly services in terms of sexual reproductive health. And maybe I would want the two of you to comment on it, because when it comes to sexual reproductive health services, we find most of them are attached to A&C services, antenatal services. And as a young person, if I'm going to look for contraceptive or any other service, I have to go through the antenatal clinic. Apart from, there are several clinics I know that at least are trying to have youth-friendly services, but you see, these are not clinics that are public clinics, so to speak. So if you're talking about this information being available, we also need to talk about the services being available. So what would you recommend in terms of making these services also youth-friendly and accessible to the young people?
So as you had mentioned earlier, we have very nice policies in place that address even the particular issue of access to youth-friendly services. So that is the National Guidelines for Provision of Youth-Friendly Services. And there are particular public facilities which are having spaces where young people can access youth-friendly services, but much more has to be done. We need to ensure that the policies are implemented to every facility in the country, to ensure that every young person is able to access the services that they need. It could be a problem in terms of resources, in terms of making sure that the information reaches the service providers, for instance, in level 1, level 2, level 3 facilities. However, we urge the government to prioritize that particular issue and make sure that the implementation and dissemination of those particular policies reaches all the facilities that are close to young people. That is how we'll ensure that they have access to the information and the services that they need. That will feed into reducing the levels of teenage pregnancies and also the levels of mental health issues that we are having among young people as a result of relationships.
Okay, thank you. I would want us to pick up on that, especially in terms of the policies. But let's take a short break, then we'll be right back. Welcome back, and if you just join us, this is Decent Conversations, and I'm your girl, Tabitha Mwai. So before we went on break, we were talking about the policies that we have that support sexual reproductive health rights for young people and adolescents. And I have a concern. So how do we ensure that the policies that we currently have support the process of CSE and we have like better outcomes? Because our country is not short of policies. Mm-hmm. We make very nice policies, they sit on shelves, and as Arnold was mentioning, some of these practitioners in these areas do not even know that these policies exist, or even if they know they exist, they don't know the content of the policy. So how do we use now the policy? Because the policy is like a legal document. Mm-hmm. How do we use those policies to make sure that as the comprehensive sexuality education is being introduced, it will be more effective and have better outcomes? Maybe you can start, Mary Liz.
Okay. For me, I credit this problem to a lot of double standard when it comes to creating a value of importance to issues in the society. And I'll use an example of recently Kenyans were taken through a process, and I don't know if calling it rigorous process is the right word, but Kenyans went through a process of getting huduma numbers. And we saw a lot of government speaking profoundly about how it's necessary for Kenyans to have that and all that kind of stuff, even though the whole process, as far as I'm concerned, was illegal, with no civic education done prior, at least 6 months before the process, with no door-to-door kind of information sharing where people are aware as to why you're supposed to take that number and all that kind of stuff. That said, the government was very deliberate about engaging all Kenyans, and they pulled resources to ensure that this process was done across the country. Now, when it comes to an important issue like comprehensive sexuality education, this is something that is done in boardrooms. We have policies that are coming up. Remember, Huduma number is something that came out as a policy that translated into a legal document, that translated into something that was supposed to be done nationally. Same as to how comprehensive sexuality education is supposed to follow the same procedure. And that said, you realize this conversation is had in mamas, even in parliament, for instance. It's not a conversation that people sit and like dedicate a whole week or a whole season in being in parliament to speak about this issue. And that alone is a problem, because then what need is a policy if the government is not doing the proper endorsement processes to ensure that people in the country are able to relate with the process. Because then the thing about comprehensive sexuality education, in a country where people think talking about sex alone is a taboo, becomes hard to break through into the society and to make people aware of it if the government is not doing its duty to endorse it. And endorsement does not only mean being in a boardroom and signing. President Uhuru Kenyatta has signed severally a bill to say all school-going girls should get sanitary pads. Is there any girl who is getting sanitary pads? There's none. So there's a problem with creating a boardroom atmosphere to any policy, because then it feels as though the responsibility to implement it is with the people who are in the boardroom. But when you go out there and endorse it and actually come up with procedures in terms of providing civic education to people out there, in terms of making people on the process by, being part of, little processes when you go to healthcare facilities, when you go to school. In that kid's diary, how many times is it written? They have an exercise in page 45 of this book. But also today, part of the discussion that we had in class was how do our children know when someone is touching them appropriately, and prompting a parent at home to continue the discussion. How many times are we having such things happening? So we need to start being deliberate about endorsing these policies. And we have so many policies that would back, that Kenya has ratified not only locally but internationally, that would back the whole idea of comprehensive sexuality education, but as long as it's still being done in the boardroom setting, it's still nothing. We'll use pens and pens and pens. Pens are cheap. What is expensive is the consequences of not implementing what we are signing to achieve. And so it's very fundamental that we leave the boardroom, we go out there, we speak, not only the government, not only the government systems, but also the CSOs, but also the members in the community, but also all these places that we access that is fundamental, even in areas of entertainment, even in media. How many times are we seeing a media house that is particularly deliberate to speak about comprehensive sexuality education and just making its audience to know what it is about? Yeah.
I like some issues that you've raised, especially when it comes to the parliament and the media, because was it last year we had so many cases of teenage pregnancies and girls getting children during the exam period, and it was just something that ran on social media. People talked about it, and then after that, you know, we kind of slowed down on it. But it doesn't stop the fact that the cases of teenage pregnancies are still there. So how do we keep that momentum, not just to have conversations on social media, but to use you know, like the legal platforms, the media, to make sure that this conversation goes on and that our policies work, and we even hold the leaders accountable, because the policies are there for the people. They are not for the boardroom. And if the policies are there for the people and they are not helping the people, then why do we have the policies? So maybe, Arnold, you can comment on how do we keep the momentum to first hold them accountable for the policies that they have brought up, and also how do we keep the momentum in the conversation and hook in the media to talk about these issues?
Okay, just first to begin on adding on to what my colleague Mary-Liz has said, we need to harness the demographic dividend, because young people below 24 form majority of the population of our country and also Africa and even the globe. So we need to prioritize their issues, because young people are the leaders of today, and they will be there for to be able to see a lot more happening in our country in terms of development as well. So the government ought to prioritize creating more awareness. It could be through media or other ways in which they have created awareness of other policies, to make sure that citizens, young people, parents, religious people, religious leaders, and everybody gets access to information on what human sexuality education is about, because the policies exist and we have the backing of the law. So creating awareness on those particular issues, we would be still in the course of the law to make sure that everybody is able to make responsible choices, especially as young adults.
Okay, so I think from what I'm getting is everyone needs to play their part. Everyone needs to play their part, but everyone is not playing their part. So maybe something you've not really commented on is how do we hold our leaders accountable? How do we make sure if this policy is not being implemented? Most of the times the CSO are doing this, but currently I think the focus is on making sure we have the sexuality education incorporated in the new curriculum. So maybe I want the two of you to comment on how do we hold them accountable, and right now, given that we are having the competence-based curriculum that is being rolled out this year, how do we then ensure these topics are included in the syllabus? And if they have been included, what has been included? Because we don't know, we just hear that CSE is going to be in the curriculum. There are conversations around not having it in the curriculum, and we are at the point of this is necessary. So maybe comment on the two.
So the first thing I could say, as caring citizens who care about the adolescents and young people of this country, we need to be deliberate and find information on these policies that exist for those of us who are able to access the information, and hold the government accountable through forums that we might be able to participate in. It could be the county integrated development plans, and it could be other national forums that are organized. Let's show up and speak out and make sure that we hold our leaders accountable in regard to ensuring that adolescents and young people have access to reproductive health information. Another thing I'd like to comment on is the topics that we need to have included in the competency-based curriculum. We need aspects of hygiene for young girls from as young as 9, so that they are taught on menstrual health, and also be able to access menstrual health towels, so that they can be able to take care of themselves properly. And this is something that the government was following up on, ensuring that young girls have access to free sanitary towels. We need to fast track and make sure that this is actually implemented. And also aspects of mental health, aspects of counseling, knowing where to find information, knowing who to talk to, knowing how to resist bad touch, and speaking out to parents when someone touches you inappropriately as a young person. What do you do? So we need to include aspects. Human sexuality education is not about sex entirely as it might have been out there. It is about a lot more, including relationships, things that almost all the young people are actually going through and nobody is speaking to them about.
Okay, I know this conversation cannot end today, and I really appreciate the comments and your inputs. And with what you're saying, giving the children a voice, because most of the time we are coming from, as we've mentioned before, boardroom. Our policies are kind of boardroom tailored, that we sit in a boardroom and think these are the problems, and we are not listening to the people who are affected. So as we conclude this conversation, maybe you can just give an overview of a way forward, or what you think we could do to make it better and even have the program successful. You can start with Arnold.
So I feel that if all of us take one step towards ensuring that adolescents and young people have information and have access to services, we would be making positive progress. So it is important that our government has a responsibility of ensuring that it disseminates information regarding the policies that exist, following up and ensuring accountability of responsible persons, ensuring that service providers at the small facilities, at the level 1, 2, 3 facilities that young people can access, are able to provide services according to the existing legal frameworks. And also let us all make an effort to find out what exactly we can do, because all of us have a role to play, and all of us need to do something to be able to make positive progress. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
In my final remarks, I think I'd say, first of all, we all have a responsibility and a role to play. And how we have this role to play is that while the government would always look at things from a policy perspective, from law enforcement perspective and all that kind of stuff, the real work is not about the policy, because the policy can be very beautiful and implemented and signed against and ratified and done whatever it is that needs to be done. But when it comes to the real issues down in the ground, it takes us being able to bridge the gap between the policy and the realities, because the realities are there with us. These are things that we live through every day. How then are we able to be the people not only providing solutions but providing a voice to young people, but also listening to children regardless? And he said something very important on gender, where we always, yes, it's true that women are more vulnerable when it comes to violence and abuse, but also that doesn't mean men are not, because then the society has been accustomed to think when a man speaks against violence, they're being weak, they shouldn't cry, they shouldn't complain about issues that are affecting them. How can you then be proactive about providing a platform which ensures everyone is given a voice, and then everyone is playing an active role? Because beyond our policies and everything, we have to be fair about the realities that we live in the society. And so for me, I'll say all of us have a role to play.
even the president of Kenya, outside them being a president of Kenya, they're a citizen of this country. And that means they have a role, a daily role to play when it comes to systems, when it comes to our education system. I recently came from a school in West Pokot, and the school has a boarding system, but the boarding system is only for boys, against girls who, by the way, the school has a population of 120 students, only 16 are girls. All of them are boys, one. Two, the reason there's low population in that school is because the girls, most of the girls drop out of school because of early pregnancies, because of FGM, and most importantly because of rape. Some kids stay as far as 1 hour away from the school, and they have to leave very early in the morning, and they have to report at 6:30, and some of them end up being raped when they come into school, and they have to drop out because they fall pregnant, or they're traumatized, or they go through a lot of mental issues because of that. But also in a school that is providing a system that enables a boy to be able to be more safer in school at the expense of a girl who can barely access that education. And so we need to come up with structures that are able, like the government has to be proactive, even if it's a private school or a public school. Doesn't it feed into the curriculum that the government has provided and guidelines? And if it does, then what is the role of the government in ensuring that a school like that should be brought up to par in terms of allowing both boys and girls access education, making it safe for both boys and girls? Because when a boy can stay in school, when they don't most of the time run the risk of being raped, vis-a-vis a girl who always runs the risk of being raped, why are you enabling such a system to exist in a society? So let's be honest about issues that are being addressed. Let's give voice to children and young people. Let's value the things that young people say, because come what may, it's the young people that are experiencing these things. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for your contribution. Without any doubt, we need comprehensive sexual education. We might, whatever way we call it, at the end of the day, we need sexuality education on all levels, whether at home, whether in school, whether in our social gatherings. It's quite important to understand human sexuality. And I really thank our panel today. Thank you so much, Arnold.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much, Mary-Liz.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, your contribution is quite important to us. We really value it. And thank you so much, Salome, for being our interpreter throughout the session. So the conversation doesn't end here. Let's keep engaging on social media. We are at Decent Conversations. Talk to us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Give us your feedback. Give us your comment. We really value your feedback. Thank you. I've been your host, Tabitha Mwai, and this has been Decent Conversations.